Maria stepped outside and looked around. Thomas hadn't arrived yet. "Well, I guess I'll wait." She smiled. She was in a good mood because today she was getting married. Then Thomas called. Maria answered and started teasing her fiancé. "Honey, did you forget about me? Or did you find a richer bride?" "Maria, sweetheart, Daniel's car broke down at the last minute and we can't come get you." I know it's a bit strange to ask the bride to take a taxi to the courthouse, but we have no other option, or we'll miss our appointment. Thomas's voice clearly showed he was very upset. "I'm sorry, darling, I can't imagine how you must feel right now. You understand that we're on the other side of the city and can't make it to you in time, even if we found another car. I've already called a taxi for you and us. Just get in the car and come to the courthouse. I'll be waiting for you there." Maria was in shock. She stood in her wedding dress, waiting for her fiancé. He was supposed to pick her up in their friend Daniel's car. Yes, they hadn't planned a big celebration and wanted to just sit in a cafe after the ceremony with Daniel and his wife, Ophelia. But taking a taxi to her own wedding? That was the height of madness. In fact, the whole idea of an economical ceremony, without even her only relative, her grandmother, had bothered Maria from the beginning. She had barely convinced Thomas that they needed to wear wedding outfits for the ceremony. Of course, she didn't want a crowd of guests, a big restaurant, or silly contests either. But arriving in a taxi? She couldn't stand that. "Miss, am I supposed to take you?" The mocking voice of the taxi driver came from the car that had just pulled up. This is something new. The bride goes to her wedding alone. In a taxi. Is this some new trend? Hobo style. What do you care? Just drive carefully and ask fewer stupid questions, Maria snapped at the driver. She was in no mood to joke around. What a humiliation. Maria thought as she sat in the back seat of the taxi. If we weren't so poor, if Thomas had a father instead of just a sickly mother, if he were a rich daddy's boy, a whole convoy would have come for me, and everyone would envy us, but no. Maria dreamed of a comfortable, affluent life. Having grown up without parents, she had faced many hardships from a young age and knew firsthand what poverty was. She only had her grandmother, who had turned 70 last year. The only way the elderly woman could help was by regularly providing them with cow's milk, homemade cheese, and butter. Their main wealth was a cow, her grandmother's favorite and their main source of food. Thomas's situation wasn't much better. His father had died when he was just 10, and his mother, Nuria, was always sick. Most of Thomas's earnings went toward her medical expenses. On top of that, his job wasn't well paid. A simple engineer, he couldn't boast a high income. And Maria so wanted to travel the world, attend receptions, and drive her own car. Until now, she hadn't really thought about how marrying Thomas would mean giving up her dreams. But the white wedding dress spread across the back seat of the taxi suddenly made her see things clearly. Do I really need all this? Am I truly ready to live like this? To accept that fate has only given me crumbs? Do I really love Thomas? There were too many questions in her head. So many that Maria even got scared. Turn the car around. I'm going back. Turn the car around, she commanded herself unexpectedly. Did you forget something? The driver asked, looking surprised. No, I didn't forget anything. I changed my mind. Are you crazy or something? First, you get in my car in a white dress, then you sit there like a zombie, not blinking, and now you want me to take you back. If you were really heading to a wedding, maybe it's a good thing you didn't make it. Just shut up, Maria snapped. But then she softened her tone and apologized. "Please, just take me back. I'm already feeling terrible. Sorry for being rude." The entire ride back, Maria sat in a deathly silence. The driver didn't say a word, and she was deep in thought about her decision. Was it right to not show up to her own wedding? Was it right to leave Thomas without even explaining? I have to be honest with myself. I'm scared. Scared to look him in the eye. Scared to see his confused and hurt expression. Scared to hear his voice. I'm afraid I'll regret it and change my mind. I need to act quickly if I'm going to go through with this. First, she turned off her phone so her fiancé couldn't reach her. Then, she slipped into the dorm where she had been living for the past 2 years and quickly packed her few belongings into a travel bag. She took out all her savings from their hiding spot. Not long ago, Maria had dreamed of using this money to set up a home with Thomas in the apartment they had planned to rent after the wedding. But now, with trembling hands, she counted the money and figured out how long she could survive on it while looking for a job in the city. Choosing the cheapest route, she hurried to the train station. A simple coach seat and an upper side bunk would have horrified any other girl, but Maria didn't even notice the discomfort. She was in a rush to leave the town where everything screamed of her betrayal. The old train carriage took her towards the capital. Maria hoped to blend into the big city. Moreover, she believed it would be easier there to find a decent job and meet a wealthy man. With the remaining money, she rented a room in a communal apartment on the outskirts and immediately started looking for work on her first day. Maria was afraid of being left behind in a city of great opportunities, and like many other new girls, she felt lost among the wide avenues and bustling streets. The first week in the big city didn't yield any results, and Maria started to slowly lose faith in her plan. But unexpectedly, luck was on her side. At one company where she applied to be a secretary, Maria caught the eye of the handsome boss. Christian immediately appealed to Maria as well. He was like the man of her dreams. Young, stylish, and educated, he stood out from all her previous acquaintances. Compared to him, even Thomas seemed far away. Soon, a passionate romance developed between them. Maria was crazy about her boss. Finally, everything she had always dreamed of was in her life. With Christian, she saw Europe for the first time. Paris, Rome, and London were at her feet. Within 6 months of knowing him, Maria had her own car, and she moved from a modest rented room to luxurious apartments in a prestigious area of the capital. Christian spared no expense for her. It was evident from the first glance that he was madly in love with his new passion. Maria couldn't even imagine that she would suddenly step into a fairy tale. And when Christian got down on one knee during dinner at a luxurious restaurant and asked for her hand, she realized she had caught her golden bird. Maria stopped communicating with everyone from her past life. The only thread connecting her to the past was her beloved grandmother. Maria never forgot about her. At the first opportunity, she sent money to the old woman. However, she rarely dared to call. She was still afraid to hear about Thomas. From her grandmother, she learned that he had searched for her everywhere, even coming to the village. But at the time, her grandmother didn't know where her granddaughter had gone and was terribly worried, thinking something terrible had happened to Maria. "How could you do that, my child? Why did you act so thoughtlessly? We were all nearly out of our minds when you disappeared right before the wedding. Thomas even went to the police and called all the hospitals. I was so distraught until you finally let us know you were alive and well. I'm sorry, Grandma. I was ashamed to admit that I chickened out and simply ran away. But what awaited me with Thomas? Poverty? Endless loans and rented apartments? Living paycheck to paycheck? We probably wouldn't have even dared to have children. But now everything is good for me. Soon there will be a wedding. A magnificent wedding. And I will definitely invite you. But her grandmother decided to rejoice for her granddaughter from a distance, rightly deciding that the high society of the capital could do without her presence. The wedding indeed turned out magnificent. A sea of guests, champagne flowing freely, and a beautiful honeymoon, after which Maria found out she was pregnant. Her husband adored her. They moved to a large house, where they created a wonderful nursery for their future baby. Maria herself took care of decorating the room for her little boy, and Christian spared no expense, wanting his heir to have the very best. The idyll ended when labor began. From the first moments in the delivery room, it was clear that something was wrong. Maria hardly remembered anything. She felt so unwell that through her semi-conscious state, she could barely distinguish the voices and only vaguely grasped the images of busy midwives and doctors. Everyone was terribly frightened, and Maria couldn't understand what was wrong with her. Drips and endless injections, and then darkness. She lost consciousness completely. "Where is my baby?" were her first words when she came to. "I want to see him." Christian stood beside her, pale as a wall and unusually tense. "Darling, where is our baby?" she asked her husband. "Tell them to bring him to me." "Listen to me, Maria." Christian's voice sounded very strange. "Our son didn't make it. The delivery was difficult. It happened the day before yesterday. Doctors fought for your life for almost 2 days, but they couldn't save the baby." Maria couldn't say anything in response. Like a fish out of water, she gasped for air and couldn't utter a word. "How did he pass away?" Her little boy, who just a few days ago kicked in her belly. Her little sunshine, whom she sang songs to every day and read fairy tales aloud. Mommy and Daddy's joy, who was supposed to brighten their big and beautiful home with his arrival. Maria's thoughts were confused. Her consciousness, still weak from what had happened, played hide and seek with her. At one point, she thought it was just a terrible dream, one of those nightmares that sometimes haunt pregnant women. She thought she was simply asleep and that waking up would dispel the nightmare, and the baby would again be in her warm and safe womb. Maria even tried to close her eyes again and then opened them with enough force to pinch herself, but alas, nothing changed. She still lay in the hospital room. Beside her was a strange and somewhat unfamiliar Christian, and her beloved son, whom she carried for 9 months, was nowhere to be seen. Upon realizing this horror, Maria began screaming like a wounded animal. Immediately, a frightened nurse rushed into the room and gave her a sedative injection. The girl felt herself slipping back into oblivion, but the dreams she now saw were not as bright and joyful as before. Darkness closed in from all sides, something evil and frightening choked her right in the throat, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the mournful cry of a baby. "Maria, wake up, come to your senses," she heard her husband's persistent voice. "Doctor, something needs to be done, she's sleeping all the time, I understand that this is abnormal." "Understand, aside from the fact that your wife has suffered a severe birth trauma, she appears to have developed profound stress. It seems her brain is refusing to accept reality and keeps her in a constant state of sleep." Days turned into weeks, and nothing changed for Maria. She lost all desire to live. She would stare out the window for hours, where the wind would spin yellowed leaves, hardly noticing the people coming and going. She had long been transferred from the maternity ward to the psychiatric ward, where they tried to restore her interest in life through long conversations and medications. In addition, her legs were affected by stress, and now she resembled more of a lifeless plant than the cheerful and carefree girl she once was. When Christian brought Maria home, her entire life was confined to the limits of one room. She didn't even want to go out to the living room in her wheelchair. Her husband's attitude towards her also noticeably changed. Instead of adoration and admiration, anger and irritation took their place. Immediately after returning from the hospital, he hired a helper, a caretaker for her. As time went on, his wife in a wheelchair with a vacant stare began to bore him. Moreover, Maria began to terribly irritate him. Christian visited her room less and less often, giving the caregiver full authority over all matters related to Maria, while he sought comfort elsewhere. After a couple of months, the caregiver resigned, citing family circumstances for her decision. Christian didn't hire a new assistant after that. Now no one was looking after Maria, reminding her to eat or change clothes. She felt abandoned and unwanted. "I'm going on a business trip," Christian informed her one day. "Will I be all alone?" Maria asked him in an indifferent voice. "There's food in the fridge. It's time for you to learn to take care of yourself." "Stop playing the dying swan act," her husband snapped with irritation. He didn't know that Maria had accidentally discovered the day before that he was not going on a business trip, but to one of the most romantic resorts in Greece, Santorini. The island of lovers. It was there that she and Christian had spent the happiest days of their honeymoon. But their love child is dead, their love is dead. Maria already understood this clearly, but still asked her husband, "Maybe before you leave, you'll hire me an assistant after all. Someone to take care of me while you splash in the sea with your mistress," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Oh, so you know everything, huh? Even better. I'm so sick of you after this year. You won't have children now anyway. Why do I even need you, a helpless invalid? Can't take care of yourself, piss on yourself. I'm not your nanny," he snapped, slamming the door loudly as he left the house. It's hard to say what Christian wanted to achieve with this. Maybe he didn't even realize it himself when he left his wife alone. Maybe he genuinely wanted Maria to pull herself together. After all, her illness was due to nerves, not physical trauma. Or perhaps secretly he hoped that she would do something to herself, and with no one around, the problem would solve itself. The situation in the family was unbearable for both, but divorcing a disabled wife didn't promise anything good for Christian either. He didn't want to share his money with Maria. Perhaps everything was not as it seemed. At least, that's how Maria perceived the situation. For a woman who had lost a child and experienced such a tragedy, this became a psychological factor that put her on her feet and gave her the incentive to survive at any cost. She herself didn't understand what was happening to her. Within her awakened such forces that few suspect until a critical point is reached. From this point of no return, there are two paths, either into the black void, or upward, towards a new life. And these forces propelled Maria to the surface at an unimaginable speed. If it weren't for Christian's cruel words, perhaps she would have acted differently, simply leaving in a wheelchair to her grandmother's, not claiming anything and not answering calls, as she once left Thomas. Maria considered this option and even discussed it with her only friend over the phone. Vanessa was a successful lawyer, well over 30, and lived in the neighboring mansion. Despite their age difference, the women became friends. After all, they were both pregnant at the same time and often joked that their children would be cousins in 25 years. Vanessa was expecting a girl. Christian's romantic vacation with his new flame was in full swing when he received the call. He hadn't contacted his wife once in all 10 days and didn't know anything about her, whether she was alive at all. But it was his lawyer who called, and what Christian heard stunned him. "I'm sorry, Christian, but we have a force majeure situation. Your wife has filed for divorce. Property division and compensation for moral and physical damage suffered during your marriage," the lawyer said. Upon arriving in town, instead of finding his wife's cold body, Christian discovered a wheelchair in the middle of the hall and a note on the table. "Christian, you're right. We have no children, so we will divorce without any problems. My lawyer Vanessa is handling everything. You're right, I'll never have children. I hope they will be yours. And I have cars and some compensation amounting to a few million. All fair." Christian tore at his hair, but there was nothing he could do anymore. Attempts to reach his wife were unsuccessful. He didn't even know where she had gone. After all their years together, he had never even asked where her grandmother lived. Of course, he could have started searching, but why bother? His legal wife, disabled. A stack of certificates and documents from the maternity hospital confirming her infertility resulting from difficult childbirth, plus a very experienced lawyer in the form of her friend, everything was against him. And Christian resigned himself, vowing never to marry until his new girlfriend gave birth to his son. But Maria didn't play the noble game with her scoundrel of a husband. She returned to her grandmother in her own car, fully resolved to claim everything due to her by law and rebuild her life anew. Of course, her grandmother was saddened by her thinness and paleness, but her granddaughter just smiled to herself. "Granny, did you not see me just a couple of weeks ago?" Maria didn't delve into the details of her personal life but asked about the news in their village. And above all, of course, she wanted to know about Thomas. No, she wasn't hoping to rekindle their relationship, but she was ready to meet him and ask for forgiveness. But what Maria learned about her ex-fiancé shocked her. It turns out he's in prison. Yes, Maria knew that after their breakup, Thomas tried to find her, and she also knew that he often drank, trying to drown his sorrow. But prison? That was completely unexpected. Nevertheless, fate took a harsh turn for her former fiancé. He got into an accident due to someone else's fault. A car hit him head-on. He was injured too, but the other driver didn't survive. And alcohol was found in Thomas's blood. He received a sentence, and the deceased man left behind a little daughter, Pamela, whom he was raising alone. His wife had died giving birth to the girl. Upon hearing this whole story, Maria decided to arrange a meeting with Thomas. And they met. Two young people who had already been deeply scarred by life. The conversation was not easy. Maria didn't hide anything from her ex-fiancé, including the fact that she would never become a mother. Thomas asked her to visit the orphaned girl in the orphanage and find out how she was doing there. 2 years passed. Thomas was conditionally released from prison. Waiting for him outside were Maria and little Pamela. Two broken souls. Two fates marred by hardship came together to support each other and do everything they could to ensure that another broken piece, little Pamela, wouldn't get lost in this cruel world but would confidently pursue her dreams, surrounded by love and care.